There is a concerted effort to replace our biology with technology. Evil is anything that denies us our divinity. Unless we shift the trajectory, that very probably we are the last generation of pure humans that this world will ever know. We are so conditioned to think of ourselves as powerless victims of a world that we have no control over. We're more than most people have ever even dared to allow themselves to imagine that they are. Do we love ourselves enough to embrace the deep truth and the responsibility of what it means to be human?
Guy here, I got to say this is probably one of the most important podcasts that I've done to date. And of course, my epic guest is Gregg Braden. It's a podcast I encourage you to listen to in its entirety. I did find myself, as Gregg was breaking it down during the podcast, starting to contract, thinking, wow, this is actually going on our planet right now. But when you listen to the whole conversation, I actually left feeling empowered. So please dive in, take on what Gregg is saying, and of course, look into these things for yourself as well. If you're watching this on YouTube, be sure to let me know in the comments below what you think of this conversation and also where you are in the world. Let's connect. It's always beautiful connecting with everyone around. Yeah, powerful podcast, man. That's all I'm going to say on the matter. Of course, as well, if you want to come and meet me in person and the guys with Live in Flow, we're running our 5-day retreats in Croatia, Bali, and Australia during 2025. We'll be running our 1-day workshops. Everything you want to know about us will be in the links below as well if you want to really put your spiritual boots on and dive in with us. Anyway, much love from me. I truly hope to meet you in person and give you a hug one day. Enjoy this podcast and share it with a loved one or friend. It's powerful, man. Gregg, welcome back to the podcast. So nice to see you.
Guy, it is so good to see you. We were talking before we hit record, and I think it's been over 5 years since we were together last. I'm coming to you from our studio just outside of Santa Fe, New Mexico. And this is unscripted. I have no idea. I'm going to follow your lead. I have no idea where we're going to go. But I appreciate the opportunity to be with your community and my family. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And you know, the last time I saw you, you actually came over with Chris Hooper. It was before the pandemic as well in Australia. And I came to see you talk in Melbourne. And I got to say, wow. Gregg, there was a moment, and I'm going completely off script here, but there was a moment where I never laughed so hard in some of the content and how you presented. Not only was the content so factual and amazing and took us on a journey, but you were able to bring some absolutely wonderful humor to it, which took me by surprise. It was brilliant.
You know, I appreciate that, Guy. We got to have fun on this planet, and the topics can be pretty heavy, pretty deep sometimes, and actually what the science shows is very interesting, is that when we laugh, we actually open our hearts to embracing the concepts that are going to follow. So it's good to laugh, and it in no way detracts from the depth and the intensity of the conversation. It opens our nervous system and our hearts and our minds, and it's fun. We love to laugh. So thank you for appreciating that.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And look, I wanted to start the conversation today, again, because we were speaking off air a little bit, but for me personally, and I use this term loosely, right? But about 10, 12 years ago, I started to have a spiritual awakening, quote unquote. And it really started to change my perception on how I saw the world, saw myself, and how I interacted with it. And I embraced it as opposed to run from it. And ever since, I've been on a different trajectory of leaning in. And what it's done for me, Gregg, in some ways, is given me a sense of freedom and peace that I never thought was possible within myself. And then a sense of contribution to something far greater than me as well. And this collaborative approach to life, I guess, where before it was little me and it was always me and my problems. And I wanted to speak to you about today then in regards about how do you look at us as human individuals in terms of our potential, what is it to wake up our divinity? Because these are my belief systems, but I'd love to know from your scientific experience and even what you spoke about, what you've been writing about at the moment, is to be human, and where can we take this?
Well, I think I'm happy to address all of that. I think one of the things that I have found has helped our community in these last few years is to give context to what it is that we're talking about. You know, I can walk into a room full of people and I can say, hey, you know, you're powerful beings, and I'll watch everybody put their head down and take a note and says, I'm a powerful being. Doesn't mean a thing to them because they've heard it a million times, and there's no context for that at all. And I think one of the most important things that we can embrace is the fact that this conversation that we're going to have right now, Guy, we cannot separate it from what's happening in the world around us. And I think most of your viewers, my community, certainly recognize that the world is not business as usual. Something's up, something's going on. Even the people that used to deny that anything out of the ordinary is happening now are in agreement that we are living a time of extremes. I think it's honest to say that. Social extremes, political extremes, economic extremes, climate extremes, refugee extremes, emotional extremes, financial extremes. I mean, you can go on and on. And it's not an accident that these are happening. They're not spontaneous. They're not just happening. We are living a process right now. And that process cannot be separate from our spiritual growth and our awakening as individuals and as a species. We are not what we have been told. And we are much more than, honestly, we are more than most people have ever even dared to allow themselves to imagine that they are, Guy, because we are so conditioned to think of ourselves as powerless victims of a world that we have no control over. In our public schools, we're teaching our young people, and this isn't, by the way, where are you coming from today? Where are you right now?
I'm about 90 minutes south of Byron Bay, if that gives any context.
Okay,
on the East Coast.
so yeah, you're all right in Australia, and
Yeah.
but this is true throughout the Western world. We're teaching our young people that human life is flawed by virtue of its existence, that carbon-based life in general and human-based life specifically is flawed. And among our flaws are things like human emotion that can cloud our judgment and our decision-making. Things like empathy, sympathy, compassion are being viewed literally as flaws. The very qualities that we cherish as a species, there is a growing body, a movement in the scientific arena viewing these things as flaws. And if we are flawed as a species, it means we need something outside of ourselves to be the best version of ourselves and to compete in the world, compete in business. Young people are being told that that something is technology. And I think we all know that technology is being dangled as the shining prize in front of our young people. They have been taught to worship the computer chip, to worship AI, to worship virtual reality. And this is all part of a bigger process that is unfolding in our world right now. There is a concerted effort, there's a movement to replace our biology with technology, computer chips in the brain, chemicals in the blood, RFID chips in the body, sensors, nano sensors that we already have, we use in medical technology, to use them universally in individuals, running through our circulatory systems, reporting our biometrics. And this movement is sanctioned by elements of governing forces. The policies are already being written and the laws are being enacted to bring us into what is being called the Internet of all things, or Ray Kurzweil wrote a book released this year, 2024, called The Singularity. Okay. And the bottom line is that there is a movement, and the technology has advanced so quickly Guy, this is already happening. This isn't in the future. This actually, it started 2 years ago. So we are now in the process of undergoing this radical shift, and the best minds of our time are telling us, unless we change our thinking, unless we shift the trajectory, that very probably we are the last generation of pure humans that this world will ever know. Now, you mentioned a new book. I am releasing a new book January 28th. The title is Pure Human, The Hidden Truth of Our Divinity, Power, and Destiny. I'm pushing back on the transhuman movement as a global application. I appreciate the technology for individuals when it's needed. I'm pushing back on the universal application of that technology. The book has two parallel themes. One, I'm identifying, and I'm not pulling any punches, where the movement has originated, where it's coming from, who is pushing it, how it's disguised through the marketing. Very, very clever, very sexy marketing on the one hand. And on the other hand, the really good news, the new discoveries, Guy, the best science of the modern world is telling us that we are so much more than we've been led to believe. And that in many cases, and I want to be really clear on this, we meet and in many cases exceed the power and the efficiency of the very technology we're being asked to replace our biology with. Now that we understand on a deeper level what it means to be human, we outperform that technology in ways that are absolutely mind-blowing. And I'm happy to talk about all of those things. But when we talk about human potential, let me just say this and we can tie into it. And you mentioned the word first. I hadn't brought it up yet. The word divinity comes in, and it's tricky because that word carries a lot of baggage. For some people, it is often linked to religion because there are schools of divinity that link those things. But the contemporary definition of divinity, you can look this up. It's amazing. Divinity is simply the ability to transcend perceived limitations, and that's it. Transcend means become more than. Perceived, and I love this, perceived limitations, they may not even be real. These are limitations that we have imposed upon ourselves because of our conditioning, through our family and culture and religion and society and science. So when we're talking about replacing natural biology with machines and AI and chemicals in the blood, what we're doing is we are denying our ability to transcend perceived limitations. We're denying our own human divinity. And that's a big conversation, and that's what this book is all about. So I wanted to lay that out, and now we can go anywhere you want to go with that.
Wow. Well, it sounds like when you say that of what's happening right now, it sounds like straight from a sci-fi movie. Like it's
well, where does sci-fi come from?
Yeah,
there is an emerging philosophy in the scientific community that consciousness informs itself through its creations. So in other words, let's just break that down a little bit. We write books, we write music, poetry, art, sculpture, all the things that we think are entertaining us, and they may be on one level. Movies, Hollywood movies, on one level they are entertaining us, and there's another level that says everything that we create is us, consciousness, creating things in the world around us to remind us of something about ourselves or something about our world. And this is the reason, this is fascinating because, you look at the movies that are runaway blockbusters, The Matrix, 1999, low budget film. They never imagined it would be the highest grossing box office film until Avatar came along. The Matrix. So what was it all about? Well, there was some Hollywood shoot 'em up stuff in there, but the bottom line is The Matrix was portraying a world that we cannot see that influences the world that we can see, and that we function in both of those worlds. And that was the bottom line for that movie. And then you look at Avatar. Avatar was reminding us of the necessity, the vital necessity of our relationship to the natural world. And then you look at the films that young people are really drawn to, Wonder Woman, The Avengers, Harry Potter, all suggesting that there are dormant or latent powers within them, and it triggers something in adults as well. It says, maybe there is something in us, because we all sense there's more to us than we've been led to believe. And if all of this, if this philosophy holds true for art and movies, books, sculpture, it must hold true for technology. And this is where it gets really interesting. Now, many of our viewers may know, if they've been with me for a while, that I worked in the corporations in the 1970s, 1980s, during the Cold War years. I was a senior computer systems designer at that time for a company called Martin Marietta. It's now Lockheed Martin. In the defense industry, there's a whole story about how I got there and why I left and what it meant to me. But the bottom line is that I was exposed to some of the most advanced technology that the world has ever seen, advanced laser systems and communications and radar systems. And to this day, Guy, I have never seen any technology built outside of our bodies that doesn't mimic or reflect what we already do in our bodies, except we do it better. And I'm going to give a perfect example, and I think people will be surprised by this. DNA stores every successful transaction in the human genome is stored and distributed throughout the entire 8 billion plus people genome on the planet. Every successful genetic transaction, those transactions are transparent. If you know how to read DNA, they're there for everybody to see. They are secure. Once they're in there, because they're distributed, they're immutable. They aren't going to be changed, and they're secure. And if those terms sound familiar, it's because that is the basis for blockchain technology that is revolutionizing finance, economy, the meaning of money, and information storage in the world. The blockchain technology that underlies Bitcoin and every other cryptocurrency, that underlies the national security secrets of every nation, that technology mimics the way information is stored in the human body. And that's only one example. You could say the same of the internet, that mimics the way that we are connected through energetic relationships. You could say the same for a vaccine, because a vaccine mimics chemically what our bodies already do naturally. So the things we're building outside of our bodies actually are mimicking or reminding us of what we already are in here. And as we awaken to the possibilities of our potential, that's how we awaken our divinity, our ability to transcend perceived limitations. And that is what we're about to give away. If we give our humanness away to the technology, we give away our biology. We give away our ability to transcend our own perceived limitations. Fascinating, isn't it?
It is fascinating. It's funny, the Star Wars scene kept coming into me where he's like, nothing to see here, move along, and they're just shuffling people on while things are going on in the background, And the question that's coming through for me then is that, are there forces that, with all this information that we have and that it can be applied to, not only for, I guess, control or fear or power or money or greed or whatever the agenda is behind something, that it can be just the opposite as well? That there are forces there that want to take this for good, to awaken humanity, to allow us into our potential.
See, now you're at the crux of the conversation, and this is unscripted. I had no idea.
Okay.
So let me ask you a question. How deep do you want to go with your audience? How deep do you want to take this?
As deep as you possibly can, Greg. Honestly, because I feel
I'm happy.
people are ready
I'm happy
hear.
to do that, and I want to do it in a way that is responsible, honest, truthful, and factual. Because when we have these conversations, what we're doing, guys, we're taking bits and pieces, we're grabbing at snippets of a bigger picture. Once you get the big picture, those snippets begin to fall into place and make a lot more sense. So I'm a systems thinker. I was a scientist. I'm a degreed geologist that's my official degree, but I got that degree at a time when computers were coming in vogue, and I focused more on the computer aspects. So that's how I became a senior computer systems designer. Strong background, math, physics, computer science, and archaeology and cosmology. And I say that because that multidisciplinary background allows me to stay current with the new discoveries that are being made. So and I'm a systems thinker. That's why I'm saying this. I'm trained as a systems thinker. So what a systems thinker does is a systems thinker looks at the big picture to see what's going on. And then once you have that, then you can go down to the nanosecond of your life in this moment and see exactly where it fits into that bigger picture. And it helps us to make healthy decisions if we understand the context. And that's why I'm going to share what I'm going to share. The big picture on, I'm going to share this from an archaeological perspective. I think it's really interesting that way. I think most of our viewers are familiar with the Dead Sea Scrolls. Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered 1946, 47 in Qumran in Israel and in the Dead Sea area. 11 caves were discovered, and they're still finding them. I mean, they're still finding relics. It's not over yet. But 11 caves containing the scrolls that pushed back the dates on biblical texts over 1,000 years. Now, the reason this is important is because they were the oldest records of the Old Testament that had never been edited. This is important because the Old Testament that we see in the modern biblical canon, as good as it is, in some respects is incomplete because it's been edited, selected information was taken out, the information was condensed, rearranged. So you can't make this stuff up. It was in the first cave, in the first large vase, these things 2.5, 3 feet tall, they weren't like little pickle jars. These were big vases. In the first cave, in the first vase, and the first scroll that was pulled out of that vase tells us the context within which everything in our world is happening right now, from a non-religious perspective. Now, the mystery, 1945, they were discovered. These scrolls, they were not made public until 1991. The Vatican fought to keep them from being released, the translations from being released. Political organizations fought. And it was an organization called BAR, Biblical Archaeology Review. A man named Herschel Shanks headed up that organization, almost single-handedly freed the translations for the public. And you have to say, what could possibly be in those scrolls that could warrant that kind of time and energy and effort? And this is what you can't make up. It's in the first cave, in the first vase, in the first scroll they pulled out. It's called the War Scroll, W-A-R. And what it says is that humankind, from the moment we emerged mysteriously on this planet, because we still don't know exactly where we came from. Science can't tell us exactly where we came from. That we have been immersed in an ancient battle between what the scrolls actually say. They identify as the sons of darkness and the sons of light. Now, I offered that in a program recently, and there were women that were offended because they felt it omitted females. They weren't talking about gender 2,500 years ago. It is inclusive of male and female. And the way that we see that battle today between the sons of darkness and the sons of light is a battle between good and evil. That's the way that we see it, and this is not a metaphor. Evil is very real, and it plays out in ways that we don't always see. There's biological evil. There's technological evil. There is evil in social media. There's political evil. There are many psychological evil. There are many forms of evil. What does evil mean? So now we defined divinity as our ability to transcend perceived limitations. Divinity is where we find our power. Divinity is where our imagination comes from, our creativity, our intuition, empathy, sympathy, compassion, forgiveness, love, the ability to love fearlessly and to forgive without expectation of something coming back. These are all examples, expressions of divinity. Evil is anything that denies us our divinity, anything that denies us the ability to express our humanness, to heal our own bodies, to love without fear, to imagine and share our imaginings with another person, to communicate, share those things. Anything that denies divinity is an expression of evil. So with that in mind, the context, everything we're seeing in our world right now, we're seeing this battle raise its ugly head because there is an expiration date on this battle. And the ancient traditions, many of the cycles converging, and many of the modern institutions all are looking at the same point of time. It's about 5 years from now. It's the year 2030. By the year 2030, policies will be enacted all along the way, but they want them in place by the year 2030. And what you're seeing is, you're seeing in the world people and organizations and nations in positions of power. They're jockeying to be in the best place that will benefit them as all of these cycles come to a close in the year 2030. And they identify it in different ways. For the United Nations, for example, they have what are called UN SDG 2030, the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, 17 goals they want in place by the year 2030. The only way to achieve those goals is to remake this world, and here's the catch, to remake our bodies in ways that we've never been able to do in the past. The World Economic Forum, 1971 is when they formed, and they've always gotten together every year in Davos. They talk about what they want the world to look like. They have every right to do that, no big deal. They had no teeth to implement their vision until the year 2019. 2019, they signed a formal agreement with the United Nations to implement through the Sustainable Development Goals the ideas of the World Economic Forum. And their goal is to essentially digitize the world and have the world managed through a massive artificial intelligence, AI. They believe this is good for the world and what the world needs. And this is where it gets really tricky, because you get into conspiracies and you get into, all kinds of crazy stuff. But this is why I began the way we just did. Is this good for us or is it not? Now we have a benchmark for evil. It's not just a metaphor. It's not just a, chit-chat conversation. Anything that denies our humanness, anything that denies our sovereignty, anything that denies our ability to express our imaginings, our creativity, that denies our love, our forgiveness, our ability to heal. This all begins with the human body. Anything that denies that is a form of evil. Now you begin to apply that standard to what we're being asked, the things that we'll be asked to change. And there's going to be a concerted effort in the next 5 years. It's going to come through legislation. It's going to be masked as very sexy marketing to young people on YouTube. hey, why wouldn't you want to get a computer chip in your brain if you can play Grand Theft Auto with no keyboard and no cables, just by thinking? To a young person who has never been taught how precious and rare and sacred the sanctity of a human body is, they are not given a reason not to follow that path. So this is a very deep conversation, and I don't know that we're even doing justice to it in the brief time that we have here. But this is the essence of the new book. I've researched it. I mean, there's an entire chapter of references for people that want to go and see where all this is happening. And, you know, as a scientist, what I could say is the technology is never good, bad, right or wrong, guy. There are beautiful places for the technology. What's happening is the technology is advancing faster than the morality of how we apply it in our lives. I'll just give you an example. Elon Musk developed a company called Neuralink. Neuralink is the first computer chips in the human brain to talk to your keyboard or talk to your hard drive with no keyboard, okay? FDA has approved those chips. They are now approved. And there is a proposal to place them into the brains or the body of newborns beginning year 2030 to give them the edge so they can compete. And that's the way it's being positioned. So I personally think it's not a good way to go, and I'll share with you why in just a moment. But the technology itself is a beautiful technology. I mean, what if there's a young man or woman who has given their lives in service to their country, military service, and they come home missing arms and legs? And with our robotics, they can have a prosthetic that is run by a computer chip in the brain that allows them to hold their own baby in their arms and to feed themselves and brush their own teeth and comb their own hair. What a beautiful, beautiful thing. It's technology being applied on an individual basis. The proposals are that it be applied en masse to everyone because this is our next evolutionary step. Well, it's not. And let me tell you why. This is one of the I'm just giving you one example. The science, the best science of the modern world now is telling us that there used to be a thinking that when we're born with a finite number of brain cells. And I remember when I was in college, that was the leverage to keep people from drinking in college. They said, every beer that you drink, you're going to lose some of those brain cells, and you've only got so many, so many to start with. Well, now we know that's not true. That the human brain is actually producing new cells. It's coming from a part of the brain, the hippocampus. We're producing those cells until our last breath, but there's a catch. And the catch is, unless those new cells are engaged in a meaningful way, within about 7 days, about a week, they will atrophy and they will die because the body thinks they're not needed. Well, when you begin putting computer chips in the brain that replace the functions of the natural cells, that principle then applies. In biology, it's called use it or lose it. That's a very common term in biology. And it applies to the whole body. You replace the immune system with a chemical, and the immune system says, well, maybe you don't need me anymore. And these are the drawbacks that you don't hear people talking a lot about. This is how you lose a species. When you embrace the technology in one generation into the body that steals our humanness, and then that is passed through epigenetics down to the next generation and next. Pretty soon the body says, we used to do things that way, but we don't need to anymore because these chips or, these chemicals or these sensors are doing it for us. And they begin to atrophy and become a vestige of our past. I personally believe that we are worth preserving. I think that we're only beginning to understand what it means to be fully human. And the more we know, the more precious, and I'm going to use that word as a scientist, we are a precious, sacred form of life. And I think we owe it to ourselves to know who we are and what we're giving away before we lose it forever. Because once we make that shift that's being proposed, and people can read Ray Kurzweil's book, The Singularity is what it's called, and there are others that are out there. They can look at the proceedings from the World Economic Forum, and Yuval Harari talks about this in the keynotes. I just want to say the United Nations, you can go to their website, you look at the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, and they're absolutely beautiful goals that even I want on the surface. Who doesn't want the end of poverty? Who doesn't want food security? Who doesn't want global health? Okay, I want those too. Now you read the fine print, Guy, of how they propose to achieve them, and it is horrendous. It is frightening. It is the largest scale of social engineering, not just the world around us, but to achieve those goals, they've got to change the world inside of us. And that's what I'm pushing back on. So I know we just covered a lot of ground, and I spoke for a while. I felt like maybe I talked too much, so I'm going to just stop there for a moment. And
Firstly, thank you. And thank you for what you're doing, because I certainly wasn't aware of what is happening to this scale. And what comes to my mind at this moment is sometimes some of the concepts, the bigger picture things can feel so big. It can then make us feel, well, what can we do as an individual?
That's where I'm going next.
Okay.
That's exactly where I'm going next.
Because I think about myself as a 20-year-old or 25-year-old that was struggling through my emotions. I was pretty much depressed for a while. I was traveling a lot. And I think about that kid then, if he was here today in this time with all the things you spoke about, I'd be, without knowing my own human potential, I'd be like a moth to a flame with some of the things that you've spoken about, because I had no perception of what was possible. When you spoke about divinity, transcending your limitations. Sure. I hadn't experienced it.
Well, we're having a conversation about these, and I think it's good to know so that we can make healthy choices. I don't think it's good to dwell, and I'm not sharing these things to make anyone wrong. We don't want to make somebody wrong or to create anger or fear or hate. This is the beauty of human divinity. When we accept the truth of our humanness, then we are no longer in fear. Divinity frees us from fear, because in divinity, remember the definition, the ability to transcend perceived limitations. The new science is telling us is that we're wired for this stuff. And here's what changed in the scientific world. They always used to look at biology through the lens of sticky, wet, gooey, stuff inside the body. And they used to print all of that in the biology books. Here's the shift. Began about 5 years ago. Is they began looking at the human body from an IT perspective, information technology. And they began looking at the cells, every cell in about 50 trillion cells in the human body. Every one of those cells produces a tiny 0.07 volts of electrical potential. You say, well, that's not much, and I agree with you, but you do the math. 50 trillion cells times 0.07, I think it's something like 3.5 billion volts of electrical potential. Every cell is a circuit. It's a gated circuit. It's got an input and an output. And we have portions of our cell that function as transistors and resistors and capacitors. We read photons of light coming in from the world around us, and we emit photons. You can measure these things. The cell membrane transmits and receives energy. DNA now is being recognized as a fractal antenna. So we all know DNA tunes to a signal. That an antenna tunes to a signal. A fractal antenna means you're tuning to many signals across a broad spectrum simultaneously. And these are engineers that are saying, well, yeah, of course, look at this. DNA is a fractal antenna. And they're publishing in obscure engineering journals rather than biology books. So the Journal of Advanced Computing, for example, is where the report was published about fractal antennas and DNA. We are so much more we've been led to believe. But here's the beauty. You don't have to know any of that, because the more complex a system is behind the scenes, the simpler the user interface. I mean, you look at your mobile phone, you push a picture, and you set into motion a whole cascade of events. You pay your bills, communicate with your friends. All you did was push a picture. That's a very simple user interface. We work the same way. Our user interface: thoughts, feelings, emotions, breath, focus, nutrient, and movement. And these are the subjects of our most ancient and cherished spiritual traditions. So we don't have to know all the technical stuff. But if you need a reason to think differently about yourself, that technical stuff gives us really, really good reasons. And all of this, guy, I mean, there's so many rabbit holes that you could go down into. I don't think it's worth the time. Personally, here's what I think is important, and this is what I want to say to our community. It all comes down to a single question. It's about love. Do we love ourselves enough to embrace the deep truth and the responsibility of what it means to be human? The power of what it means to be human. The power that allows us to transcend our perceived limitations. And the way we answer that question, you don't do it with your voice. You do it through the actions, the choices you make every moment in life. Whoever's watching this, as soon as they end this, they will go through the rest of their day. And every moment of every day, we make choices that either affirm life in our bodies and the world around us, or deny life in our bodies and our world. And when you recognize you're either affirming or denying life, then you can adjust your choices accordingly. No judgment. Just make better choices. And when people ask, what should we do? Should we do this? Should we do that? I go back to the benchmark. Does what I am being asked to do, whether it's my family or my community or my government or some other government or some organization, does it deny my humanness? Does it deny my ability to love, to imagine, to heal, to forgive, to communicate? And if it does, that tells me all I need to know about the choice that I'm going to make. Doesn't mean it changes the choice, but at least we're coming at it from a conscious perspective. We're not blindly being led or forced. We know exactly where we are on this spectrum in this very ancient battle between the forces of good and evil, sons of darkness and the sons of light. And I think that structure, for me anyway, as a systems thinker, for me as a scientist, I still deal with everything everybody else is dealing with, but it helps me to have a little bit of structure and to know, why I'm making the choices that I'm making.
Yeah, beautiful.
Does that make sense if I say it that
totally, 100%. It's absolutely. And I got one last, I'm aware of your time, Greg, and I just got one last question for you.
We're good. We got time here.
We've got some time. During your period of, like, I was looking at your YouTube channel last night and the amount of content you're putting out, and people are reading, like you can see there's a hunger for this information right now. And through your time, through speaking and sharing over the years, what do you see? Are you seeing a shift? Do you feel like the world is waking up consciously, or do you feel it's dividing? Like, what is it that you've noticed over your time?
I'll tell you honestly, what I would like to say is the world is waking up. I would really like to say that. I'm going to tell you very honestly what I see. There's a lot of hurt in the world, unresolved hurt. And when hurt is unresolved, it becomes fear in our lives. And fear is often expressed as hate. So the growing hate that you see in the world is the outpicturing of our brothers and sisters that are deeply hurt, a lot of hurt in the world. The response I see to that is I see two parallel societies emerging, and it's not like one society is in Northern Australia and the other is in Southern Australia. Often it's in under the same roof at the same dinner table, where Maybe young people are thinking differently than their parents. I'm seeing two parallel societies. One of those societies is in so much fear of what has happened in the world that they are all in on everything. They're all in on all the new technology, into the body. It's called the transhuman movement, is the name. Trans means beyond. So beyond human, the transhuman movement. Computer chips in the brain, chemicals in the blood, sensors in the skin. They're all in on all of that. And then there's another segment of the population where I live in a rural area in northern New Mexico. And when I go to my little food co-op, for example, that's where I see my neighbors. They're not having this conversation because they don't have time, Guy. They're struggling with a high price of food and housing, working 2 or 3 jobs. They don't have this conversation, but here's what they tell me. So, Greg, something is wrong. The world, it's changing too fast. The changes are happening to us. We're not choosing them. They're being forced upon us. They said we need to slow down, go back to basics. So what they're doing is they're pulling their kids out of public school and they're homeschooling their kids so they can instill the values that they think are important in life, not what the kids are learning in school, which is crap, absolute crap in public schools. And there's no excuse for it, and it's happening. They're growing their own food because they don't trust the food. They're digging or having their own wells drilled because they don't trust what's in the water, in the city water. So they don't know everything we're talking about, but intuitively they sense that we need to go back to a simpler. They're not rejecting technology, but they're allowing technology to serve them rather than becoming slaves to the technology. The other path is becoming enslaved by the technology. So I'm seeing this happen right now, 2 parallel societies. That is unsustainable. You can't do that for long. So I think what will happen is that we'll do what humans always do. We're going to check each other out. And we're going to say who is happier, who's healthier, whose lives are more fulfilled, whose children are better adjusted, and who, whatever the answer to that is, we're going to make the adjustments. My sense is we'll probably end up at a midpoint, somewhere in between, where we live simpler lives, but we have embraced the technology in limited fashion. We'll always have the internet. I think we're always going to have virtual reality, but we're not going to be putting the chemicals in the blood, computer chips in the brain. We're still going to reproduce biologically and sexually. There is a movement now saying that is obsolete, that we can do it outside of the body and use gene editing and have perfect babies every time. That is part of the transhuman movement. And people that are pushing back on that say, we're going to maintain the kind of conception and the human connection that has always been necessary to create a new life. They want to keep that. So I think this is what we're seeing, and it's being forced so quickly, Guy. And like I said, the next 5 years, we are all going to be strongly, strongly encouraged through media, through policies. In some cases, there will be laws that will be enacted, and we'll have to choose whether or not we are going to accept those when it comes to technology inside the human body. This is my focus right now. I think we really, really have to look very closely at what are the consequences. Are we willing to pay the high price? Are we willing to give our humanness and our biology away for the efficiency and the speed of computer chips and the loss of human emotion and empathy? And again, it comes down to the question, do we love ourselves enough to preserve the gift of our humanness? I think this may be the greatest task that any of us have in this generation, is to preserve, to cherish, preserve, and protect the gift of our biology, the gift of our humanness, in an age when we're being encouraged to give it away, to relinquish our humanness in exchange for technology. And we'll be told that it makes us safer. We'll be told that it makes life easier, more convenient. All those things is what we're going to be told. We have to ask, is it worth the price of relinquishing the sacredness, the divinity of our humanness? And that is a choice we have to make as individuals. We each have to make our own choice.
Yeah, totally. Wow. And a lot of it, I feel, comes back down to just, like you say, slowing down the pace of life a little bit so you can just make rational decisions. If we're constantly kept in fear and we're constantly kept in stress, we're not even going to give ourselves the space to make a rational decision in the first place. Yeah.
Well, that's true. Well, Guy, I just want to thank you. You've been doing what you've been doing now long enough that you have become a hub of an entire community. Mm-hmm. And I want to thank you for pulling all that community together, for keeping them informed. I want to thank you for your trust, because the truth is you didn't know what we were going to talk about, but you still trusted me with your community, and that means a lot to me, brother. And if we were in the same room, I'd give you a big hug after this conversation. So I'll give you a virtual hug, and certainly I want to thank everyone watching. Just thank you for hanging in there, doing the best you can do in a crazy time, to be the best version of yourselves and to make the best world possible. You know, we're going to get through all this together. We're going to get through it. We're going to be fine because we're made for this. And at 2031, let's you and I have a reunion podcast, and we'll see how it all came out, okay?
Totally. Just thank you so much, Greg. Thank you for all that you do. Just for the listeners, links will be in the show notes. A link to your new book launch as well that's coming out and everything. And
yeah, the book, it's available for pre-sale right now. The physical book, they don't release it until January 28th. I could tell you they're going to run out of the first print run. I know they are. So that's why you can purchase on Amazon right now, or wherever books are sold. And I think did they give you an advance copy, by the way?
No, they haven't. No, I'm
sorry for that. They should have. They should have.
It's all good, Greg. It's all good.
Well, I will have my executive director, Lori, I will have her send you a PDF. I'll have her do it in the morning. And so you can have that advance copy so you can check it out.
I look forward to it. Thank you so much, Greg.
Thank you, brother. I appreciate it. Thank you. Love you all. Take care.